to me, probably the last classic T-Rex record.
What a great song. Very T-Rex. Very, very T-Rex. I mean, you know, you could sit that next to Jeepster and Melgaroo and all of that, and it works perfectly well.
It seemed a bit flat and a bit slightly monotonous. It wasn't as inventive as the early stuff. It wasn't as exciting as the early stuff. The stuff was starting to sound a little bit samey, or Marc Bolan's material by that stage. It just, I don't know, it was glam, but it was the dregs of glam, and it was songs like I Love to Boogie that I think pretty much caused that whole punk explosion of a load of anarchists saying, we don't want to listen to this.
I love to boogie. I love to boogie on a Saturday night. I said I love to boogie. I love to boogie. Teenage boogie. I love to boogie. I love to boogie on a Saturday night.
Mark used to listen to I used to collect a lot of doo-wop music from the 50s that had never been released in England at its time. One would find it on import as and I used to collect music that I hadn't heard. I would go to street markets and I would get to learn the labels, get to learn names, and I'd just buy things just from reading and think, this might be interesting, and it was cheap enough that you could, and I'd make great discoveries, and then I'd play them to Mark, and he'd go, you know, we'd never heard some of the music before.
Mark's music with T-Rex was a nice bridge in a way between that innocent British rock and roll of the 50s, the sort of Cliff Richard, Billy Fury era that he rather liked and was quite charmed by, and then the more aggressive kind of rock of the 70s, and blending that together, I suppose that must have influenced a lot of people in punk rock, which came back in the late 70s, that sort of demand for innocence, but of course they were much more aggressive and powerful than Mark's T-Rex ever were.
During the punk boom, T-Rex were like gods. The same way as Oasis looked up to the Beatles, most punks looked up to T-Rex as one of the bands that showed the way. They had a punk attitude, but with great songs. And every punk band I ever worked with always said T-Rex quality.
It was a funny sort of time because in the music industry around 76, 77 you had this new explosion of youth culture. Back in the early 70s when Marc Bolan had started with T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex, he was kind of the height of youth culture. He was the cool thing. Now he'd gone a bit out of favour, and punk had come in. Punk was this cool thing. And Marc Bolan, being this charismatic, if you like, maybe slightly a little bit arrogant kind of musician, came up with this thing. Oh yes, well, I invented punk. I was the cosmic punk.
A lot of bands have claimed T-Rex as an influence. I can see why, because it's raunchy, simple, and he was the godfather of punk, as Mark told everybody himself many times.
My love out by the roots, but I'm not such a bad boy. Oh no, you ravish the runes of my tunes. You put on the gloves of my loves, but you're not a bad girl.
The soul of my suit is again soul searching. It's very from the heart, it's very open. You know, he was exposing himself. It was a low point in his life when he was singing about it.
You know, and I think those points, the dragging, you know, London Boy's Soul of My Suit, it's you know, it's quite sad. I think it's quite sad because you feel he was sort of lost.
Oh yeah, even slowly, baby, rockin' and rollin', yeah.
Sold My Suit, to be quite honest, I find it hard to remember it. I've listened to it. By then, T-Rex had stopped becoming the force they were. They had records out. They were always treated with respect. They always got good television and things like that, but they didn't make the impact they were a couple of years ago.
I Damaged the Soul of My Suit. That was a cool little record.
I mean, I think Soul is a really beautiful song as well, you know, and I just wish he'd realised that. If he'd realised more that he didn't need to try so hard, he was capable of it.
You pulled out my love by the roots, but I'm not such a bad boy. Oh no.
I can recall playing on Dandy in the Underworld because an album came through the post, an LP, an acetate LP, and I had to listen to it and thought, yeah, that sounds good.
Marc Bolan was ready to reinvent himself, and his final album with T-Rex, although he didn't know it at the time, was Dandy in the Underworld, and it was a very personal album. In the past, he'd been singing all about, you know, the witches and the goblins and all these wonderful things that he'd read about in Lord of the Rings, and then he'd sort of twist it slightly and he'd be talking more about sort of light-hearted things. But Dandy in the Underworld was really him coming clean and saying, Dandy in the Underworld is me. I had these problems and I'm coming through them.
It's got all the dark side to all the success and all the money and all the fame, but it's also got that dark undercurrent, the drink and the drugs, you know, and he was a dandy, you know, he was the flowered shirt wearing elf, you know, this ethereal figure, and I think that was his statement he was making on there. It was an exploration into his low points.
A lot of the critics believe that that was actually his best album. It was up there on a par with Electric Warrior. And it really signalled a time of big change for Marc Bolan. He was running out of money. He had to do something pretty quick. And I think it's funny because when musicians and bands are in that time where they've run out of money and they really, really need to do something to come up with a big hit so they can redeem themselves, they do seem to.
Dandy in the underworld, when we come up for air.
Not all the tracks I love, some of them were very, very good, and the memory of it will stay around for a very, very long time. Whether it's one of my favourite albums, and I can't really say.
You have to accept it for what it is.